Hi, I'm Steve Herb, Director of the Pennsylvania Center for the Book, and welcome to our evening. I forgot to see if the speaker's back here. Okay, good. That's always good to check on, but thank you for being here. It's my pleasure to first introduce Mary Garm, who's on the Board of Directors of the Pennsylvania Humanities Council. She's the Director of the Lackawanna County Library System, and she's here. She's a last-minute replacement for Nancy Eaton, who just had a kind of a rough coughing spell at dinner just 30 minutes ago, but she sends her greetings. It sounds like this. Sorry, that was bad. So sorry, she'll be fine. I'm sure she'll be fine. but I'd like to invite Mary to come up and bring greetings from the Pennsylvania Humanities Council and Commonwealth Libraries. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Stephen. I will do my best not to cough throughout the entire introduction here. It's such a pleasure to see you all this evening, and what an exciting event we have in store for us tonight. Let me tell you a little bit about the Pennsylvania Humanities Council. The Pennsylvania Humanities Council is a nonprofit organization that inspires individuals to enjoy and share a life of learning. Using programs and partnerships, the PHC fosters the sharing of stories and ideas with the goal of increasing understanding and a larger vision of human life, community, and possibility. Through a series of speakers, the Statewide Speakers Bureau, and packaged book discussion programs for public libraries, the PHC serves as an important resource for all Pennsylvanians. The Pennsylvania Humanities Council is also a granting agency, and they provide grants to organizations that support humanities programs centered in the arts, history, and literature, as well as other humanities fields. The newest venture for the Pennsylvania Humanities Council is something called the Teen Reading Lounge. And Teen Reading Lounge is an interactive book club that promotes reading and discussion of popular young adult literature with a focus on graphic novels and fantasy fiction. Through book discussion and artistic workshops with artists and writers, teens create special projects and sharpen their critical thinking skills. The Teen Reading Lounge introduces teen audiences to the value of the arts and the humanities. But most importantly, this program helps libraries who are new to young adult programming learn about teen programs and to gain basic skills that service that population. We are just delighted to be able to partner with the Pennsylvania Center for the Book on this exciting program this evening. And we'd like to just say a couple of thank yous. First to our partners, Stephen Herb and the Pennsylvania Center for the Book, and the Penn State Library's Learning Services, without whom this venture would not have taken place. We would also like to thank Commonwealth Libraries, who have generously supported the efforts of the Pennsylvania Humanities Council to engage libraries throughout the state. And we give a special thanks to all the librarians and library leaders who have worked with us. They are vital to the work of the Pennsylvania Humanities Council in advancing the public humanities. We hope you enjoy this evening's presentation, and I will turn this back to Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you. Allow me to add my welcome to the attendees here in Foster Auditorium at the University Park campus of Penn State and our remote viewing sites across the state. Hello, everybody out there. Thanks to our Lynd Ward Prize co-sponsors in the university libraries, Library Learning Services, and Rare Books and Manuscripts. Would the folks from those departments and the Pennsylvania Center for the Book please wave, nod, or look around sheepishly, please? Okay, good. That was good. There was a little sheepishness there. Okay, good. All right, thanks. Special thanks to our primary sponsors for the Pennsylvania Center for the Book at Penn State, the primary sponsor, and all of its programs and initiatives, Dean Barbara Dewey, who is here in the attendance. And thanks also for our statewide co-sponsors for tonight's special event, Pennsylvania Humanities Council. Please, could you wave council employees? Yay. And in addition to Mary Garm, we also have Ann Benzel, the CEO of Benzel Pretzels, here somewhere. There she is. She's the chair of the PhD. And we had Nancy Eaton up until like 20 minutes ago, but she's here in spirit. And we also have Claire Zales, the Deputy Director of the Department of Education, is here, and Susan Panabaker, the Director of the Bureau of Library Development. I also want to recognize Virginia Matthews, and some of you will think, because she's not here. She passed away earlier this month. A program like this would not be happening without her remarkable advocacy for libraries and children during the last half of the 20th century. At her memorial yesterday, John Cole, the director of the Center for the Book at the Library of Congress, said, "I speak on behalf of Virginia's many friends in the world of reading promotion and literacy, including her longtime colleagues at the Center for the Book and the Library of Congress. During her decades of service to her nation, she developed and carried out valuable projects relating to early childhood, Head Start, family literacy, and library promotion in rural America. She will not be forgotten by the many people whose lives she's touched." The Lynd Ward Graphic Novel Prize honors Mr. Ward's seminal influence in the development of the graphic novel and celebrates the gift of an extensive collection of Ward's wood engravings, original book illustrations, and other graphic art donated to Penn State University libraries by his daughters, Robin Ward Savage and Nanda Whedon Ward. Between 1929 and 1937, Ward published his 6 groundbreaking wordless novels. God's Man was the first among them, and they've been reissued by the Library of America in a 2-volume box set entitled Lynd Ward, 6 Novels and Woodcuts. The first time that the nonprofit publisher has included a graphic novelist in this award-winning series. Ward is being inducted into the Will Eisner Comic Awards Hall of Fame this summer. His daughter Robin says her dad would have been very surprised with that decision. Thanks to former Dean Eaton and current Dean Dewey for their foresight in sponsoring this prize in Lynd Ward's name. I wanted to remind everyone that tonight, following tonight's presentation, we will be holding a reception in the Mann Assembly Room. Just head out the door you came in. Go out the door you came in. Don't go out the other door. And actually it doesn't. But anyway, when you get out there, make a right and you'll see it. Drew will be signing book plates he designed for this occasion to put in your very own copy of Set to See when you buy it, when it comes back into print. Did we have anything to do with this going out of print?
I suspect so.
Oh, good. So sorry we couldn't have it here tonight, but that's the price you pay for winning an award. Tonight we are gathered to honor Set to See and its creator, Drew Weing, as the sole honor book for the Lynd Ward Graphic Novel Prize in its inaugural year of 2011. Drew has been creating comics since he was 14 years old and has had a national following for his online comics, especially his online strip, Pup. His partner and spouse, Eleanor Davis, is also a graphic artist and is our special guest here tonight. Set to See, published by Fantagraphics, is a small wonder of visual narrative, a superbly executed graphic novel that combines iconic cartooning and realistic detail that delivers a quietly moving story unfolding primarily through images. It epitomizes the whole notion of the graphic novel set forth by Lynd Ward. The illustrations are brilliant, and the balance between word and image is spot on. The book encapsulates the power of comics to combine an aesthetic experience with a lovely story, with strength and beauty that lies with its simplicity and subtlety. There are some people in here who recognize those words because they wrote them. I'd like to recognize, we have 3 members of the jury for this year's Lynd Ward Prize here, Jared Mazzillo, Scott T. Smith, and Jerry Zoltan. Could you please stand and be recognized? We also have Susan Squires here, who's a member of the advisory board, as well as Elisa Cahoy. If you could wave, you don't have to stand. Thank you. And I won't introduce next year's jury members, because guess what? I'll introduce you next year when we're doing this again. Drew Weing, please come forward to accept the Honor Book Prize for the Lynd Ward Graphic Novel of the Year. Our commemorative is still in the design stages, right, Will? Yeah. So we'll be shipping you that this summer, but we wanted to present you with this gift to mark both the night and the award, the Library of America box set of Lynd Ward's 6 graphic novels.
I wanted to thank the Pennsylvania Center for the book and the Pennsylvania Humanities Council and the Commonwealth Library and also the jury and advisory board for the Lynd Ward Prize. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to have been chosen for the Lynd Ward honor and excited to get to visit Penn State, which I've never seen before. Cartooning, like all kinds of art, is like setting out on a voyage. You're standing on a shore, looking at a vast, unknown sea, a destination in mind, but no idea how to get there. My book, Set to Sea, is my first graphic novel, and hopefully the first stop on a continuing journey. Here's where I started out. When I was little, I had an after-school sitter. She had a son who had gone off to college, but left a basement full of teenage detritus, an Atari with faux wood paneling, and big chunky joysticks, a picture of a waterfall in Hawaii where they made the water actually look like it was flowing. But most importantly, a cardboard box full of dog-eared comic books. These comics scared the hell out of me. Not just the horror comics, like weird mystery tales, young couples stumbling into houses full of ghosts, or weird war tales, Nazi troop columns stumbling into caves full of ghosts. But even the comics about superheroes, on the cover, there would always be a frightened character saying something like, "Superman, we're trapped in another dimension, and unless you save us, we'll be lost forever." The Justice League would have to be shrunk down to microscopic size and injected into somebody's bloodstream to fight off an alien disease. I didn't find these comics corny in any way. They were terrifying. I was a cowardly little kid. I was frightened of even going down the horror movie aisle at the video rental store because I worried that just looking at the video boxes might actually drive me insane with fear. But down there in this musty basement, I would always be compelled to pull out a new comic from this seemingly inexhaustible supply. I think children have an instinctive attraction to comics, a simulacrum of our big, noisy, mostly incomprehensible world, but safely shrunk down to a manageable size, boxed in, with each panel a bite-sized snippet of time and action that can be absorbed at your own pace. Every kid draws comics too, even if they, or we, don't realize that's what they should be called. As soon as you have the ability to draw a vaguely recognizable character on a piece of paper, the next obvious step is to draw the next thing the character is doing. A kid looks at our big, scary world and captures it on paper, reducing it to shapes and lines utterly within the kid's control. As a kid who grew up in the middle of the woods, 10 miles away from a podunk little town, I spent a lot of time drawing, but I didn't want to draw comics professionally. I don't think I even realized that actual humans did all of the artwork. I think I half-consciously might have thought there were giant industrial machines that stamped the characters out. Surely a human couldn't draw such precise little images. Sometime in middle school, when I realized that there were real people who actually had jobs just drawing pictures, my ideal profession was to be the guy who illustrated Dungeons and Dragons guidebooks. So I copied my favorite artists copiously and shamelessly. My relationship with comics had been pretty tangential after those babysitter days. I read the newspaper funnies and kept a pace of the career of Garfield, but not much more than that. Then when I was around 13, I was with my mom at a Dollar Tree, and they had these shrink-wrap 3-packs of comics, Overstock, from the mid-'80s. I picked some up. Reading them, I felt that old familiar strangeness. In addition, though I wasn't a very accomplished artist, the drawings that made up the comic were now something I could understand, get a handle on. This is Nexus. And this, so I proceeded to copy them. This is my version of Nexus, a character called Omicron. Interesting perspective. This is Grimjack, and this is my version called Demon Slayer. The early 90s were a strange time to get into comic books. Similar to what would happen to the internet economy a few years later, a strange investment bubble had formed in the comic book market. Not only were the old standby comic book publishers riding high, Marvel's X-Men, DC's Batman, Superman, who was being very publicly killed off right around then, of course to return a few issues later, but a number of new companies had sprung up, formed by renegade hotshot artists who wanted a bigger piece of the pie. The hottest comics were selling in the millions, and their artists were rock stars. In high school, my friends turned me on to these extreme comic books. I went to a comic book store for the first time, where I was suckered into dropping 10, 15, 20 bucks on issues that were only a few months old, but highly collectible. Of course, their value would continue to rise exponentially. Who wouldn't want to jump into this exciting field? For the first time, I started to recognize the distinctive style of different artists and form favorites. Certain hallmarks of line and shading and pose were easy to copy and instantly lent an exciting, professional sheen to my drawings. Most of the hottest artists of this period had grown up reading classic superhero comics, and they weren't even that much older than me. As always, I copied furiously. I knew by this point that each comic book was put together by a different team of people, but I came up with a half dozen characters and had grandiose plans of doing a monthly comic for each character, not including special crossover and team-up issues. I've always had a problem with my projects running away with me. In the end, my affair with superhero comics was intense but brief. By my last year of high school, I'd gotten very inspired by the examples of some alternative cartoonists. Jeff Smith's Bone, Dave Sim's Cerebus, and others who had taken the route of self-publishing their own comic books. These were less vanity press and more one-person publishing houses. I decided that I was up to the challenge, so I started writing and drawing my own comic book, which was sure to rocket me into stardom. I took a year off after I graduated high school to work on my comic, while I waited tables in the evenings, saving up money for printing costs and advertising. My comic was called A State of Bliss, and it revolved around a kid who got fed up with modern society and ended up marooned on an uninhabited island with a cast of wacky side characters. I got an issue and a half done, but instead of publishing them, I decided that I probably ought to go to art school, which was a good move and saved me a lot of heartache. I just wasn't ready artistically, much less for the business side. But comparing a page near the beginning to a page near the end, I made a lot of progress, so it wasn't wasted time. But the more I learned about drawing, the more I realized that I had a lot more to learn. I went to the Savannah College of Art and Design, one of the few schools that had a comics program. Not only did art school force me to do 4 years of steady drawing, it meant I was drawing things that I wouldn't necessarily choose to draw on my own. I was in classes with hundreds of other kids who approached comics from every possible entry point: Japanese manga, newspaper strips, TV cartoons. Another often overlooked benefit of art school is that you'll get thousands of examples of how to make a horrible drawing. One of my most influential teachers was James Sturm, who went on to found the Center for Cartoon Studies in Vermont. He was maybe most inspiring in his breadth of taste. He always seemed somewhat perplexed by those of us benighted oafs who had never read Gasoline Alley, or who hadn't heard of Jim Woodring, or who couldn't appreciate Jack Kirby. I left SCAD with a much wider knowledge of the history and current scene of comics. The only trouble was that I hadn't quite discovered how I wanted to draw them. There are so many ways to approach comics art, I couldn't settle on one style. After I graduated from SCAD, I was in a post-college haze for a couple of years. As a way to keep myself creating regularly and trying to give some structure to my life, I started a journal in comics form, which I kept not quite daily for a year and a half. I also feel lucky that I was able to document the day I met my future wife. If I thought I knew about comics, Eleanor's taste in comics was an education in itself. She had the good fortune to grow up in a comics-loving family and had been weaned on everything from Ranma 1/2 to Little Lulu to Popeye. Inspired by beautiful old Sunday strip comics from the 20s and 30s, the days when a comic strip would take up an entire page of the newspaper, like George Harriman's Crazy Cat or Frank King's Gasoline Alley. I started working on a comic called Pup. Instead of a huge sheet of newsprint, I had the internet, which could be as big as you wanted. This particular comic, which you scroll through to read, featured the entire solar system and probably would have been 6 or more feet wide if it had been printed on paper. Not having limits isn't always a benefit to creativity, though. Sometimes you need rules, even arbitrary ones, to work against, or the freedom becomes intimidating. In late 2004, I was having a bit of an artistic block. I thought a good way to shake myself out of a rut would be a simple exercise I'd done in a class with James Sturm at SCAD. Basically, on day 1, you draw the first panel of a comic without trying to write ahead or figure out where the story is going. The next day, you draw the second panel, and so forth. It's a good exercise to limber up your drawing, produce some work without putting too much pressure on yourself about how the final project will turn out. That's the idea, anyway. I knocked the first panel out without too much trouble, just a guy sleeping. The next day, I pulled out a little and showed where he was sleeping. A bar, loosely based off of a real bar called Moon River, a favorite of my Savannah cartoonist cronies and myself. This took a little more planning. I had to figure out what the main character's actual body looked like, for one. And I was already breaking the rules and planning for the next panel. The main character gets kicked out of the bar, which in real life is only a few blocks from Savannah's River Street, a historic dock on the Savannah River with cobblestones and shops built into old warehouses. So I had the character walk down to the docks. And then I knew that I had to get him onto a ship somehow. With each step, the project got a little more complicated. I started having to think up side characters. I started coming up with scenes that might happen later on in the story. Because it had become a nautical story, I needed to learn more about sailing and how to draw ships. I couldn't afford a detailed, accurate model ship, but I found the second best thing, a model shipbuilder who had thoroughly documented his clipper with 1 million photos on Flickr. Pictures of every possible angle. I also checked out books from the library about the tea trade, clipper ships. I even got a dictionary of nautical terms. I read C.S. Forester's Horatio Hornblower series and Patrick O'Brien's 20-volume Master and Commander series, both about naval life in the early 1800s Napoleonic War era. Richard Henry Dana's 2 Years Before the Mast was especially useful, a journal of a young man's voyage to California and back in the 1830s. By the time I was done, I might have even known enough about ships to possibly begin drawing a book set on one. I recently measured my stack of prep drawings and reference printouts, and it was 3.5 inches thick. There are 2 contemporary comics that were big influences on Sit to See. The first is Black Lung by Chris Wright. I first met Chris in Savannah. We both went to SCAD, and I used to see his comics in the school paper, but I actually didn't meet him until after I graduated. Chris's lush and elaborate cross-hatching inspired me to start drawing with an old-fashioned crow-quill pen again, those scratchy dip pens that our forefathers used. 6 years ago, he showed us these pages for a book about pirates he was working on. He'd gotten about a quarter of the way through the story and gotten stuck and blocked. Eleanor and I kept pressuring him to finish. In some ways, Sit to See ended up being a sort of challenge to him, picking up a lot of style and details and daring him to finish his book before I finished mine. He finally finished Black Lung last year, and I beat him by a couple months. The second influence is Poor Sailor by Sammy Harcum. In 2003, this really tremendously influential anthology of art comics came out called Kramer's Ergot. One of the less experimental but extremely beautiful comics in this anthology was Poor Sailor. A young man leaves his wife and his contented life to join his brother on one voyage. And as you can guess from the title, the results are not happy. Harcum was obviously deriving some of his imagery from old newspaper cartoons from the 20s and 30s, like Popeye, something I was getting more into at the time as well. There are few comics, old or new, that depict action with the same energy and clarity as E.C. Segar's Popeye. Another classic newspaper strip that taught me about using pen and ink and sheer cartooning was Billy DeBeck's Barney Google. I paid homage to the Popeye character, Alice the Goon, and Barney Google's racehorse, Sparkplug, in this scene. A couple of years into it, I had a pretty good idea of the overall arc of the story and how it would end. I sat down and did little sketches for each page of the story to the end. And I realized I'd have to go back and edit the material I had already finished if I wanted the thing to hold together with a tight structure. I edited some panels and redrew others completely, replacing this one with this, for example. And I pared some panels out that I liked, but just didn't flow or add to the story. For the cover, I thought an old-fashioned book design with a lot of shiny gilt lettering would be totally appropriate. So I started doing some Google image searching, and I found this website called handsomebooks.com that just had the most amazing-looking books from the turn of the century and earlier. And I wanted Sit to See to look like it could have come from the era in which it was set. Handsomebooks.com seems to have vanished now, unfortunately, but the internet can be a wonderful source for stuff like this. Finally, 5 years after I had drawn one panel with no idea where it was going, I had Sit to See, a finished book. But it started out as an exercise to help me break an artistic block. An easy toss-off side project had become a decade-spanning adventure about a poet finding his voice. My wife, Eleanor, and I have given summer comics drawing workshops to kids, and we're always amazed by the pleasure the younger kids take from drawing. They have no self-consciousness. When they're young, your perception of drawing is the same as of playing. The character on the page exists as an endlessly malleable toy to be played with in an infinite sandbox. There's very little awareness of a second party trying to make heads or tails of what the drawing even depicts. Even as a grown-up, a lot of these same pleasures and comforts of drawing carry over from childhood. And as an artist, you're distilling life into these little characters, setting them off and seeing where they'll take you, and charting your way as you go. You might follow someone else's course for a while, but eventually you'll end up in unexplored territory. Even now, I still find something scary about good comics. You get the idea that you're only seeing the surface, and that there are unknown, unplumbed depths, and sometimes there's no help for it. You've just got to launch a little boat and row.
This is mine. You have yours. Keep everything turned on. We have plans for questions. He got a 1-second break. Now he's going back. Actually, you can be loose now.
Yeah.
Because you have your mic, right? Right, John, wherever you are. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So, any questions from the audience? We have some from out and about that came in earlier, so we'll turn to those. But there's a class here. Yeah, here we go. I'm going to bring the mic to you. Don't talk to the mic.
I was just curious about the business side of it. You know, you create this wonderful piece. How do you get it to a publisher willing to publish? Was that a difficult part of the process?
Eleanor was actually gracious enough. When I had the story, it wasn't totally finished, but I had, like I said, done the sketches all the way to the end. I printed it out as a little book, kind of a mock-up of what the book actually finally ended up with. And Eleanor had hand-stitched little hardback copies. And I was at a show, a small press comics convention called SPX, Small Press Expo, and I put one into the hands of the publisher of Fantagraphics, Gary Groth. Right. And he called me. He got it on the first day of the con, and the second day, or when the day I was packing up, he called me while we were loading stuff in the car and said he wanted to put it out, which was very flattering. So that's how the specific book came to be published. Was there more about any of the other business aspects you wanted to know?
No, I just always think, you know, how
Right.
if you create something and it's such a tough process, even if you've got talent, to reach, you know, somebody who's going to get it out there. And I just wondered what the process was like for you, and the incredible feeling of knowing it's going to get out there. It can be overwhelming.
Yeah, I think the internet has been a big game changer in terms of that, because I think now you're seeing more and more people putting out stuff online for years even, and publishers swooping in to pick out the cream of the crop.
Others? You want?
Take a question from.
Please do.
Okay. I have a question that was submitted earlier, and I do want to remind our friends who are watching online right now from throughout Pennsylvania that you can submit a question through Media Site Live, and we will ask your question right here live as well. So this was a question. Oh, there you go. Just kicked in. I bet they didn't hear any of that. Okay. Here's the first question. How do you deal with an inner critic when it comes to your writing and illustrating? And how do you take chances and sort of ignore that inner critic?
It's really hard. I mean, Set to Sea really started as a way to get around that, to have a project that was so unplanned and low pressure that I wouldn't choke up on it. And it worked. It took a long time to get done, but by the time I realized I was actually writing a book, I was so far into it that it was too late to stop. So I guess I would have no more other advice than to just throw yourself headlong into it, and if you have to go back later on and make a lot of painful changes like I did, it's fine. The only way to start it is to start it.
I have a question over here. It's okay.
I
wondered how the experience of doing this and having it come out as a physical book has changed your attitude toward the previous comics you were doing that were web-based, and how do you feel you're going to work with those two modes?
I guess I think that there is, as we go on, there's just going to be more and more material appearing online with the internet as its final home, its destination, and it's going to be hard to get used to that, and but that's just the way of how it's going to go. And there are a lot of benefits to the online publishing medium. For one thing, your stuff can be accessed by basically anyone all over the world. I remember when I was doing my both of my webcomics, I would get hits from Russia, Australia, and doing a physical book, you have a limited amount of copies that are going to make their way into the hands of people who have sought them out, essentially. And online, it's very, somebody likes something, and they post about it or Twitter about it or put it on their Facebook, and all of a sudden, hundreds of people have seen your stuff. And of course, that also carries with it the fact that, you become just one of a million other voices clamoring to be heard on the internet. So it's a democratizing medium, but I guess we'll just have to deal with it.
Another question? Yeah. Right over. Thank you.
Hello. You mentioned working with a pen. Are you still working with a Crocodile? And how are you adding your color? Is it all traditional?
When I do color, it's usually, I still do use a pen for all of my drawing. So it's this odd combination where I'm using a technology that was probably invented in, God knows, pre-Renaissance. And then I scan it into my computer and add the colors that way. So, but I would like to use more traditional mediums. I took some painting classes in college and haven't really picked it up since then. But.
So your originals are digital?
No.
Or printouts? I'm not clear on how you would submit this for publishing.
For the color part, it's all done electronically these days, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to send them anything on paper for set to see. I drew them on paper and I scanned them in, and it went through the wires to Fantagraphics in Seattle, and then it went through the wires from Seattle to Singapore, which is where they printed the book, and then they put it on the slow boat and sent it over again. So if it was going to be in color, it would just be done on the computer before I send it off.
Thank you.
Scott.
Yeah, I was curious about the size of the book, because to me this is one thing that's very striking about the book and really distinguishes it from a lot of other things you're going to see on the shelf. The small, I don't know if everyone knows the small size, but
Right.
what were you, I guess.
The book is this big.
Right, yeah. Can you talk about your decisions about the size of the book and what you were thinking?
Well, it was largely, when I first did that very first panel, I just took a piece of paper that was a quarter of the size of a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, just because it seemed like a handy size. I think in the original exercise I had done in James Sturm class at SCAD, we had done our panels on index cards, and so I just made my own set of cards out of better paper quality paper, and so it was largely just an issue of chance at first, but I was really pleased by the way the final, it had a lot of benefits of giving me this very small area to work in. So, I mean, the thing about art is you've got this infinite amount of variables of size and composition and color, the actual, scene you're depicting, obviously. And if you can rope off a couple of those, sometimes it can be a real, aid to creativity to just only have to think about a couple of aspects, or at least eliminate a couple of worries. So it was all a fluke, basically.
Okay, we have a question from one of our viewers online. Her name is Margaret Chirito, And her question is, will you have the energy to start another graphic novel? And if so, any idea what the theme will be?
I've got a couple things in the works. Unfortunately, like we were talking about with the voice of self-doubt, it gets to me too. So I've got several projects that I've kind of kept on the back burners for a while now, waiting for everything to come together in some sudden flash of intuition to make it suddenly seem feasible to do them. But yes, I do have a couple things that I'm working on currently. I probably ought to just draw the first panel and go with it.
Any questions from our class here? Anybody up for extra credit? Bold enough to break through this glass ceiling? The professor has a question.
I know that some political cartoonists have begun to animate their work that's online. I was wondering if you were going to pursue that as a way to go forward.
I really love animation. I don't see it as my chosen, it's not my calling, I would say. And I think that the cartoons I've seen online so far have been kind of this bizarre crossbreed between political cartoons and full animation that I think is probably only like a temporary step. It would be great if somebody was just like, oh, we want to make an animated movie out of one of your books. And I would love to work on the sidelines of one, but I guess it's a discipline all of its own that I'm going to leave to the experts.
Anybody else? Okay. Mary?
Has the publication of this book changed your aspirations or your expectations of yourself as an artist?
It might have raised the pressure. I guess it's been a weird ride for comics in the last decade or so. When I went to SCAD, so I got into comics, like I was saying, in the mid-90s when there was still an idea that you could become this really famous artist. But by the time I got a little bit through school, it was dissipating already, and it had really kind of boiled away. And for a while, I was pretty sure I was going to just work in obscurity for my entire life, and there'd be no way to ever make a living on comics, which I'm not really sure is true or not yet. So I think that as comics have gotten more and more attention in the literary and mainstream worlds, it's just been, it's great, it's wonderful, and I plan to keep creating as though that was not the case as much as possible. So hopefully I will continue to draw books as though nobody was reading them except for me.
Any last questions? Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could talk about your decision to make each page like one panel. I mean, I guess maybe because you were doing this exercise, but it wouldn't have to be one
Right.
panel.
I could have, for a while, I was, to keep my own reference, I didn't want to haul the original art with me everywhere I went. I was printing them out in little 4x4 things. But the more I got into it, the more I just liked the idea of just having one, one piece of art to focus on per page, and keeping the book really small seemed nice. And I liked the similarity to old illustrations you'd find in books from, the turn of the century and earlier, where there would be just this, you'd be reading and then you'd turn to this one page which would have a single beautiful engraving with a little caption underneath. "To me, boys," said the captain, and I like the kind of the similarity for the title page. I tried to capture a little bit of the feel of the illustrated books. That would be like nautical adventures and stuff from, turn of the century or so.
Related to that, Drew, over here, when I was looking at the book, it put me in mind of those big little books from back in the 30s and 40s, which were essentially even smaller than this, but single page drawings. And I was curious to know if you were familiar with that medium and if that had any factor in the way you approach this.
Is this the Little Golden Books?
No, they were called Big Little Books.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Popeye, everything.
Right.
And they would also sometimes have little miniature drawings so that you could make little miniature flip books out of them, if you know what I mean.
Definitely, I've seen those. I mean, I've never actually owned one of those, and they weren't something I had around as a childhood. So, but I've seen them at flea markets and stuff. So I can't say it was actually an influence, but it's a pleasing similarity.
So thank you, Drew, very much.